Everybody like and subscribe, praise the bell icon. Story number 1.
It was the kind of hospital most people tried to forget about. Tucked away in a small, quiet town, the building had a long, unsettling history. Rumors about it were whispered for years. Stories of strange occurrences, inexplicable disappearances, and patients who spoke of things no one could explain. Most of these stories were dismissed as the ramblings of the mentally unstable, but those who worked there knew better. One particular night, a nurse named Sarah was working the late shift in the emergency room. The hospital was unusually quiet, the kind of eerie stillness that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. It was just past midnight, and the usual hum of machines and the bustle of doctors and patients had quieted to a low murmur. Sarah's shift was slow, with only a handful of patients trickling in for routine treatments. It was the kind of night she normally liked, peaceful, uneventful. But that night would change everything. At around 2 a.m., the doors to the ER opened with a loud squeal, and a man was wheeled in, his eyes wide open and filled with terror. He was trembling uncontrollably, his hands clasped tightly together as if holding onto something invisible. His clothes were ragged, his skin pale and covered in sweat, and he was muttering nonsensical words that made no sense. "She's here, she's watching, don't let her in," he kept repeating over and over again. Sarah quickly moved to his side, trying to calm him down. "What happened to you?" she asked, her voice gentle. But the man's eyes darted around the room, scanning the corners as if something or someone was lurking just out of sight. His body jerked violently, as if trying to get away from something that only he could see. "Tell me what happened," Sarah insisted, but the man only whispered in a hoarse voice. She's still here. She follows me. She won't leave." Sarah's heart began to race as the man started to struggle. His body was seizing, and his face contorted in terror, as if he were experiencing some unimaginable horror. His eyes locked onto Sarah's for a moment, filled with a kind of fear she had never seen before. And then he screamed, a bone-chilling, inhuman sound that echoed through the halls. As she tried to hold him down, he suddenly stopped moving, his body going limp in her arms. Something wasn't right. The atmosphere in the room had shifted. The lights above flickered, and for a moment Sarah thought she saw something, just a shadow, dart across the corner of her vision. Her blood ran cold. A doctor rushed in, and they quickly got to work on the man, but despite their efforts, he was unresponsive. They couldn't find a pulse, no matter how hard they tried. He was dead. But the most unsettling part came when they removed his hospital gown. There, etched into his back in deep, claw-like scratches, was a symbol, a strange, twisted design that looked like nothing they had ever seen before. The doctor looked at Sarah, his face pale, his eyes wide with shock. This is the same symbol from the old records," he muttered under his breath. Sarah's mind raced. She had heard the stories, the ones about the patients who had died under mysterious circumstances in the hospital, but she never believed them. Now, standing in the room with the dead man and the strange symbol, she couldn't ignore the mounting terror that gripped her. The doctor's voice broke through her thoughts. "We need to get to the basement," he said urgently, his tone grave. "There's something down there, something that's been down there for decades." Despite her fear, Sarah followed him as he led her down to the hospital's old, forgotten basement, a place that had been sealed off years ago after a series of strange incidents. The air was thick with dust, and the walls seemed to close in around them as they descended into the darkness. The doctor led her to a door at the far end of the basement, a door that had been locked for years. He fumbled with the key, and when the door finally creaked open, a horrible smell wafted out, rotting flesh, decay, and something worse. Inside, they found what had been hidden away for so long. There, in the center of the room, was an old decaying figure, a woman, her body twisted and contorted as if it had been tortured for years. Her eyes were wide open, but there was no life in them, only an empty, soulless gaze. And around her, scattered on the floor, were dozens of symbols, the same ones that had been found on the man's back. The doctor stepped back, his face drained of all color. "It's her. She's the one who's been causing the deaths. The ones who see her, they're never the same again." Suddenly, the room grew colder and the door slammed shut behind them, trapping them inside. The woman's lifeless eyes seemed to blink just for a moment, and then the shadows around them shifted. Sarah could hear soft whispers in the air, faint but growing louder. "She's awake. She's free." In a panic, Sarah tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers grew louder. The shadows twisted and writhed, and Sarah felt something cold, something otherworldly, press against her chest. She couldn't breathe, couldn't move. And then, in the pitch-black darkness, she saw her, the woman, standing right in front of her. The last thing Sarah heard before everything went black was a whisper, soft but unmistakable. "You're not leaving." The hospital was never the same after that night. No one ever saw Sarah again, and the old records remained sealed in the basement, gathering dust. But some say, if you're ever in that hospital at night, you might hear the whispers too. And if you listen closely enough, you'll know that she's still there, waiting for the next soul to claim.
Story number 2.
It was a cold and foggy evening when Sarah found herself working the overnight shift at the old psychiatric hospital on the outskirts of town. It wasn't the busiest of hospitals, and most nights were uneventful, but tonight felt different. A strange unease hung in the air, one that even the usual hum of machinery and echo of distant footsteps couldn't mask. Sarah was assigned to check on room 13, where a patient named Peter had been staying for weeks. Peter was a peculiar man, often lost in his own world. He was a tall figure with hollow eyes, and he spoke very little. But when he did, it was always about the same thing, the whispers. "The voices, they talk to me," he would say, his hands trembling as if trying to grasp something invisible. "They're coming for me. I hear them every night. They're closer, closer now." But the staff assumed he was simply delusional, part of the reason why he had been placed in isolation. Tonight, as Sarah made her way to room 13, she felt the air grow colder. The hospital seemed quieter than usual. The lights flickered intermittently as she walked down the narrow hallway. It was strange. There were no sounds of distant conversations or bustling staff. Just silence, thick and unnerving. She reached Peter's room and hesitated before knocking. "Peter?" she called out softly. There was no response. She pushed the door open slowly, the hinges creaking in protest, and stepped inside. The room was dimly lit by a single bulb above the bed, casting long, eerie shadows across the floor. Peter was sitting in the corner, facing the wall. His back was to her, and his shoulders were hunched, as if he were trying to shrink away from something. His clothes were ragged, his hair matted with sweat. The air around him seemed dense, suffocating. Sarah's heart began to pound as she stepped closer, the feeling of dread creeping up her spine. "Peter?" she asked again, her voice trembling. He didn't move. Her breath caught in her throat as she noticed something strange. The walls of the room were covered in deep scratches, gouges that hadn't been there before. It was as if someone or something had been desperately clawing at the surface, trying to escape. Suddenly, Peter's voice broke through the silence, soft and hoarse. "They're here, Sarah? They're inside my head." Sarah froze, her hand gripping the doorknob tightly. She didn't know what to say. Before she could react, Peter turned his head slowly, his eyes wide and unblinking. His pupils were dilated, and his expression was twisted in terror. "It's not just me anymore," he whispered. "They found you." The temperature in the room plummeted. Sarah's breath became visible in the air, and a faint sound began to rise, a low, guttural whisper that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It was unintelligible at first, but then through the static of the noise, Sarah could make out a single word: "Help." Her pulse raced as the whispers grew louder, now accompanied by a soft scraping sound, like nails on the floor. Peter's eyes darted around the room, his mouth moving in silent terror. "They want you," he hissed, his voice shaky. "You have to leave, now." Before Sarah could react, the door slammed shut behind her, trapping her inside. She turned to face Peter, but his body was now contorted in unnatural angles. His limbs twisted as if they were being pulled in different directions. He let out a guttural scream, the kind that seemed to echo from the depths of some otherworldly place. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, as Sarah backed away, her heart thumping in her chest. She turned toward the door, but it was locked, the handle cold and unyielding. The room felt like it was closing in on her, the walls pushing in from every side. The shadows seemed to move, creeping along the floor, the ceiling, the corners of the room. They weren't just shadows. They were shapes, figures, faces. Sarah screamed, but her voice was drowned out by the relentless whispers. Peter's body was writhing, his eyes now completely black, his face contorted in a grotesque expression. It was as if something had taken hold of him, something that wasn't human. His mouth stretched into an unnatural grin, one that went on forever. The whispers surged in volume, a deafening roar of voices that seemed to pierce into her mind. They were saying her name over and over again, until the very walls seemed to echo with it. Sarah? Sarah? The door finally swung open, and Sarah stumbled out into the hallway, gasping for breath. But the hospital was no longer the place she had entered. The walls were cracked, the floors stained with something dark and sticky. The lights flickered, revealing shadowy figures standing at the end of the hall, figures that weren't there before. And then, just as quickly as it all began, everything went silent. When the morning staff arrived, they found room 13 empty. Peter was gone. There was no sign of him, no trace, no blood. The room was untouched, save for the scratches on the walls, now covered by layers of old paint. The staff assumed Peter had escaped during the night, but Sarah knew better. She couldn't explain it, but she felt the whispers still echoing in her mind, the cold breath on the back of her neck. As time went on, Sarah left the psychiatric hospital, but the whispers followed her, lingering in the corners of her mind. She would never escape what had happened that night, and every time she thought she was free, she'd hear it, the faintest whisper, just behind her ear. We're still here.
Story number 3.
It was a typical autumn evening when Derek's car broke down. He had been driving down a desolate, winding road through the mountains when his engine sputtered and died. The sky was darkening fast, and the only light came from his headlights, which barely illuminated the thick fog rolling in from the woods. With no cell service and no sign of another vehicle, Derek reluctantly decided to leave his car behind and try to find help on foot. The road was isolated, surrounded by dense trees, and as he walked, a strange chill in the air made him uneasy. There was something wrong with the silence, something oppressive. It wasn't the usual quiet of the woods at night. This was the kind of silence that made your skin crawl. Derek's footsteps echoed too loudly in the empty space, and the occasional rustle in the bushes made his heart race. After walking for what felt like an hour, Derek spotted a dim light in the distance. It flickered, like a candle or a lantern. Relieved, he quickened his pace, hoping it was a house or a cabin where he could get help. The light grew brighter as he neared, and soon he could make out a small old house, half hidden by overgrown trees and vines. It looked abandoned, but the light inside was unmistakable. He knocked on the door, but no one answered. After a moment, he pushed it open, the creaking hinges protesting as he stepped inside. The house smelled musty, like it hadn't been lived in for years. The walls were lined with peeling wallpaper, and dust covered every surface. Yet the light remained, glowing faintly from a corner room. Hesitant but desperate, Derek followed the glow. The room was small, and it took him a moment to adjust to the dimness. At the far end was a single, flickering candle on a wooden table. Beside the table sat a rocking chair, moving slowly back and forth, though there was no one in it. Derek froze. Something was off. It was as if the room itself were alive, breathing in time with the rocking chair. He took a cautious step forward, but the floorboards creaked, breaking the silence. From the corner of the room, a voice whispered, soft and barely audible, "You shouldn't be here." Derek's blood ran cold. He spun around, but the room was still empty. His breath came in shallow gasps as he tried to calm himself. He must have imagined it. It was just the isolation playing tricks on him. But the voice came again, this time louder, more urgent. "You shouldn't have come," it said, and this time it sounded like it was right behind him. Derek turned, and there in the corner of the room, standing just at the edge of the candlelight, was a figure. It was a woman, her face obscured by long, unkempt hair. Her body was unnaturally thin, her arms stretched too long, and her fingers curled in a way that made Derek's stomach churn. Her eyes, when they finally met his, were hollow, black pits, devoid of any human warmth. Her lips barely moved when she spoke, but Derek heard her voice inside his head as if it came from within the very walls of the house. "Do you hear them?" she asked, her voice not hers, but something ancient and unsettling. Before Derek could respond, the candle flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. The woman's presence grew stronger, the air around him thickening, as if something was closing in. The temperature dropped sharply, and Derek could see his breath now. His heart was hammering in his chest, and he took a step back, his feet unsteady, his mind racing. The rocking chair began to move faster, the creaking sound echoing in the silence. Then he heard something else. A low, guttural growl coming from deep within the walls. Derek's breath hitched in his throat as the shadows in the room seemed to shift, forming shapes that were not quite human. The woman's smile widened, impossibly so, and her voice rasped again. "They're coming for you. They've been waiting, just like they waited for me." Derek bolted for the door, but it slammed shut in front of him with a force that made him stumble backward. The walls seemed to close in, and the shadows were moving, crawling along the floor, up the walls, and toward him. A shrill, distorted scream pierced the air, one that came not from the woman, but from something far deeper, something inhuman. In the corner of the room, another figure appeared, this one much taller, with elongated limbs, its face hidden beneath a hood of blackness. Derek's body refused to move as the figure slowly extended a long, bony hand toward him. A voice, low and cold, rumbled in his mind. "You should have never stopped." The door behind him flew open, but it wasn't the way he came in. It was a dark, endless hallway, filled with the same oppressive silence and shadows. There was no escape. Derek screamed as he turned and ran toward the door, but it only led him deeper into the nightmare. The last thing he saw before everything went black was the woman's smile, her face twisted into something almost unrecognizable, her eyes gleaming with hunger as the shadows consumed him. In the morning, a passing driver would find Derek's car, but there would be no sign of him, nothing but the cold wind and the rustling leaves. The house, too, would disappear. It was as if it had never been there at all. But sometimes, if you drive down that road at night, you might catch a glimpse of a flickering light in the distance. And if you listen closely, you might hear a whisper on the wind. "You shouldn't have come."